Sir, just give me your name, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Abe Fonensteel with Kearney and Associates here on behalf of the Kansas County and District Attorneys Association today. We ask your permission to introduce 24 RS 2721, which is a bill concerning the rule of evidence and allowing evidence of previous domestic violence offenses.
Very good. Any objection to that introduction? Seeing none, we'll make that request for you. Thank you. Any additional bill requests, committee? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to our hearing on House Bill 2487. While the revisor is getting ready to give us an overview of that, we do have quite a few. I believe we're at about 15 proponents, and so I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. So if we could try to keep our comments to 3 minutes, and maybe if you're going to duplicate what somebody else has already said, yeah, you might consider keeping that out. With that in mind, take it away, Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2487 provides immunity from prosecution for certain drug offenses when persons either seek or provide medical assistance related to the use of that controlled substance. The bill creates a new section of law. It provides that a law enforcement officer shall not take a person into custody for possession of a controlled substance or possession of drug paraphernalia if the law enforcement officer reasonably believes that the person either initiated contact with law enforcement or emergency medical services and requested assistance on the person's own behalf because the person reasonably believed they needed medical assistance as a result of the use of a controlled substance. It also requires that they cooperate with law enforcement and emergency medical services in order to get that immunity. The second situation is the person was one of not more than 4 other people who rendered aid to another person who reasonably appeared to need medical assistance as a result of the use of a controlled substance or initiated contact with law enforcement or emergency medical services and requested medical assistance for another person who reasonably appeared to be in need of medical assistance as a result of the use of a controlled substance. In that situation, the person has to provide their name and other information that's requested by law enforcement or EMS. And they also have to remain on the scene until assistance arrives, and they have to cooperate with law enforcement or emergency medical services. The third situation is when a person was the person who reasonably appeared to be in need of medical assistance as the result of the use of a controlled substance. And in that case, that person is required to cooperate with law enforcement and EMS. Each person who meets the criteria in subsection A is immune from criminal prosecution for a violation of possession of a controlled substance or possession of drug paraphernalia or any similar city ordinance or county resolution that criminalizes the same conduct. That's the case unless the quantity of the controlled substance found at the scene is sufficient to create the rebuttable presumption that that person was intending to distribute the substance. This section does not apply to a person seeking medical assistance during the execution of a search warrant, an arrest warrant, or an otherwise lawful search. Nothing in this section precludes a person who is immune from prosecution from being prosecuted based on evidence that's obtained from an independent source. A person's not allowed to initiate an action against law enforcement based on an officer's compliance or failure to comply with this section. And then a law enforcement officer would be immune from liability for arresting a person who is later determined to be immune from prosecution under this section unless there's reckless or intentional misconduct. And I can take any questions.
Thank you, Natalie. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we have many people to testify. Substantively, other than the 4 individuals who are eligible and other than the fact that consumption by a minor or possession of alcohol by a minor, it was 2016 SB 133, are there substantial differences in how this works or the procedure works or what immunities are conferred?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you who might not be familiar with the 2016 legislation, 2016 Senate Bill 133 put a similar immunity provision in our minor in possession of alcohol statute. So if someone calls to get assistance for someone else, they'll be immune from prosecution under the MIP statute. This section of law is substantially similar. The provisions that are contained in this immunity provision that are not in the MIP one would be subsection A1, which is the city ordinance or county resolution provision. I'm not sure if cities adopt similar MIP ordinances. I don't really.
I think they do.
Yeah, so that doesn't appear in the MIP provision. Subsection B2 also is not included in there. That's the intent to distribute provision. There's no similar thing to that in minor in possession. Subsection C is not in that provision, which is the provision about the execution of a search warrant or an arrest warrant. You'd still, that's not present in the MIP one. And then subsection D, which is the preclusion of being prosecuted based on independent evidence. That's not.
Okay, that's very helpful. The limitation for 4 individuals who are eligible for the immunity, I know those numbers are different, but does this bill define what happens in a circumstance where there might be 6 eligible individuals and how we decide which 4 out of the 6 receive immunity and which 2 go to jail?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The MIP provision, I believe it says 1 or 2 other persons. This one says 4 persons. So it does not speak to how, law enforcement is to, if they arrive at a scene where there's 6 people, how they're to determine which 4 would be eligible.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, with your leave, does this legislation provide or confer immunity from revocation of probation and or parole, or is this only applicable to independent criminal prosecution?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Carmichael made me aware that he was going to ask this question, so I had a chance to kind of talk it over with Jason too to get our thoughts straight on it. But subsection 1, it specifically says they can't take a person into custody based solely on the commission of an offense described in subsection B, which it cross-references to simple possession or possession of drug paraphernalia. So because that language talks about the commission of an actual offense, probation violations, post-release violations, those aren't new offense provisions. And so the way I read it, I'm not sure that you would be immune from some type of proceeding about a probation violation.
I agree with your interpretation, Mr. Chair. I hope we can look into that. Thank you.
Certainly. Any further questions for Natalie, committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll now be pleased to hear from our proponents. Let's start with Chairman Pat Proctor from the 41st District. Mr. Chairman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak to this bill, and thank you for hearing this bill. It's very important. Committee, if you'd told me 2 years ago that I was going to be up here advocating for a bill that would provide immunity from prosecution for drug crimes, let alone co-sponsoring, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But then I got a chance to meet some of these families in my district, and I'm going to be brief because I want you to hear their stories. I think you'll be as moved as I was. But this bill's desperately needed. We've got a crisis in our state and in our country. The border crisis has made every state a border state. This summer or this fall, I'm a member of the Kansas Security Committee that the Vice Chairman chairs, and we heard from the KBI that they seized enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in the state of Kansas 5 times over. And they said that 60% of the pills that they seize that aren't marked fentanyl, they're marked Percocet or oxycodone or something else, but they're fentanyl, 60% of those pills have a lethal dose that will cause an overdose in an adult. And this stuff is flooding our streets, and it's flooding the streets of Leavenworth. I talked to the chief of police who's in support of this measure, Pat Kitchens for Leavenworth, earlier this week. They went out on 40 overdose calls in the city of Leavenworth in 2023, and almost a dozen of those were fatalities. And so this will remove the obstacle from the people who are present when that person overdoses from calling for help that will save that person's life. And if we can save one life, it's worth it. Thank you. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, and we're going to go ahead and hold questions till the very end. So if you have any questions, let's write those down so that we can hear from everyone. Thank you. All right, we'll now be pleased to hear from Ranking Minority Leader Jason Probst from the 102nd District. Sir, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board, committee. I too will, you have my written remarks in front of you, so I'm going to abbreviate what I have to say because we have a lot of compelling testimony that will be much more powerful than anything I have to say. I just want to thank the committee for taking this up and having the discussion. I think it's an important policy that we can put in place that will help families. As the previous speaker said, anything that removes a barrier to help, anything that removes a barrier to making contact with somebody in substance misuse, active substance misuse, and connects them with a community of people that can help them is going to be beneficial. But we had a lot of conversation last year on fentanyl testing strips, and I said it then and I reiterate it now. We have to keep people alive long enough for them to get into recovery, and this is another tool to do that. And if there's a barrier that's preventing them from reaching out for help, and we can save people's lives, I think we owe it to people to do that. So I would have you look at my written remarks, but I want to reserve as much time as possible for the people who have subject knowledge to speak and for people who have first-hand experience and have been affected by this issue to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Nick Hoheisel from the 97th District. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members from the committee. Like the previous two speakers, I will keep my comments brief. You do have my written testimony. I am Representative Nick Hoheisel. I do represent the 97th District, which is southwest Wichita, located in Sedgwick County. In 2022 alone in Sedgwick County, we had over 300 overdose deaths in Sedgwick County. But I'm also here today as a brother with a brother that is currently involved in a over decade-long fight with substance abuse. And every morning, I worry that my mom is eventually going to get that phone call that many mothers, including mothers here today, have unfortunately gotten. I'm grateful for our co-sponsors and as well as Ed Clump and law enforcement for their help on this legislation. I want to emphasize to the committee, please do not look at this like a soft on crime approach. This is a pro-life bill. That's what we do here. This is a pro-life bill that emphasizes the urgency of preserving life. As the previous speaker said, we need to keep these folks alive long enough to get them into treatment. I ask you just to please look at it through that lens. You know, whether it's teenagers experimenting with pills or older individuals struggling with addiction, each life is a precious gift of God that deserves preservation. Kansas is one of 2 states currently without a Good Samaritan law for drug overdoses. Wyoming is the other state. Oklahoma just passed a Good Samaritan law a couple of years ago. That is what HB 2487 is modeled after. So I urge the committee to please support this today. The life saved by this legislation could very well include our loved ones, including my brothers. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, now I'll be pleased to hear from Ed Clump on behalf of our law enforcement associations. Thanks for joining us.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Ed Clump. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Peace Officers Association. We support this bill with some conditions, and those are in our testimony. We also kind of give you an idea why we support it, but I'll just cut right to the chase for time's sake here. Our support hinges on 3 conditions that you'll see right in the middle of the page on our testimony. It's important that we not give immunity to those who are distributing the drugs or manufacturing the drugs. but this bill is tailored to only give that immunity to those with a simple possession charge. To be clear, that includes misdemeanors, but it includes some felonies in some cases, and we're okay with that. It is very important that people feel that they can stay and help. The last thing we want is for people to recognize that somebody's in a medical emergency due to a drug overdose and run off and leave them lay to die. That's the last thing we want to have happen. So those are the conditions that our support hinges on. There is one place in there that I'd like to mention, and it's in bold right below that numbered list in our testimony. We would recommend that in subsection B1 on page 2, lines 4 and 6, to limit that immunity for violation of 215709, subsection B, to only include subsection B2. B1 is possession of paraphernalia that's used to manufacture or distribute drugs. And that's why we would ask that B1 be not included in that. The 4 people were mentioned. I didn't have that in my testimony. I'll just mention that briefly. I'm not sure where the 4 people came from, but here's our position on that. Right now, that 4 applies to both the people giving aid and the people who called for assistance. We feel it's important on the part of the people giving aid to limit that number. Whether 4 is right or not, I'm not sure. The people that call and ask for assistance, we can document who those are. But the concern with the giving aid is we don't want a situation with 40 people there and 35 of them say, oh, I was given aid, so I deserve to have the immunity. And by limiting that number, I mean, you can only have so many people generally. So, but whatever you do with that, that's not a big hurdle for us. So whatever the wisdom of the committee is on that, we'll be fine with. But I just thought I'd address that while I was up here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'll answer questions.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate law enforcement working to find compromise on this bill. All right, we'll now be pleased to hear from Chrissy Mayer, Chief Community-Based Service Officer, DCCA.
All right, thank
Welcome.
you. Appreciate the time. My name is Chrissy Mayer, and I'm the Chief Community-Based Services Officer at DECA. Our agency has a strong background in substance use disorder prevention and treatment efforts. I've been in this field for nearly 24 years, and I've had the opportunity to learn best practices from other states and also innovations in our state. I'm here today on behalf of DECA to support this bill because it will save the lives of Kansans. This bill will ensure that anyone who is with a person experiencing an overdose will administer naloxone if available, call for help, and remain with the individual without fear of prosecution. In 2022, an average of 62 people died each month in Kansas from a drug overdose. In nearly 11% of these deaths, a bystander was present. Among these deaths with a bystander present, nearly 90% provided no assistance for various reasons. Passage of this bill will help empower bystanders to respond. DECA has operated the Kansas naloxone program since August of 2020. During that time, I've had the opportunity to connect with individuals and organizations who have used our services, and I can confidently say our naloxone program has saved lives. Based on feedback we have received, we estimate that naloxone kits from our agency have saved the lives of nearly 300 Kansans. Through our program, we've had many individuals reach out to ask how laws can be changed to protect those who are trying to help someone during an overdose. There is fear of consequences when calling 911 that sometimes prevent action, resulting in a very preventable death. So I'd like to share a few stories from people who have been impacted by our program. The first is from a mother who says, "My son is addicted to fentanyl. He has had naloxone used on him 3 times. He will be going to inpatient treatment in 2 weeks. Pray that treatment helps. He knows so many others addicted and several who have died." The second, "I administered 2 doses at a bar and saved someone." Another, this is from a son. "My parents are elderly and have lots of prescriptions. My mom inadvertently took too many pain pills and overdosed. We were able to revive her with naloxone." And finally, "As with the last kits I received from you, I left them at houses where people were consistently using either fentanyl-laced pills or the absolute deadly fentanyl powder. The kit I always have with me I used yesterday on a 23-year-old girl who was gray in color, not responding, and extremely shallow breathing. Someone called me and asked me to come to an address. 1 dose and a knuckle rub on her sternum brought her back. EMS arrived about 60 seconds after I did, and she'll be okay. I know by me leaving kits at various houses, it has saved several lives. I get calls from people thanking me." These are just a few examples of how lives have been saved with naloxone. Passage of this bill will save the lives of more people. In the 48 states and jurisdictions that have enacted Good Samaritan laws, studies have found an increase in the likelihood of individuals calling 911 if they are aware of the laws. However, awareness of these laws does vary across jurisdiction, which may impact the willingness to call 911. Through our naloxone program, DECA has an opportunity to increase awareness and educate individuals about the importance of calling for medical assistance when naloxone is administered without fear of prosecution. We strongly encourage passage of this bill to help ensure that anyone who is with a person experiencing an overdose will be empowered to act and save a life. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Chrissy. We'll now hear from Anya Barnett, Director of Safe Streets of Wichita Coalition.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Thank you.
My name is Anya Barnett. I am the Director of Safe Streets Wichita Coalition in Wichita, Kansas. We are a coalition of folks with living and lived experience, bringing prevention and harm reduction to the greater Wichita community. We stand in support of this policy change because it does create help for people who need it most. And I want us to lead with the folks who have experience and expertise in prevention science, public health, and realizing that we have to respond differently to this crisis, that it's not necessarily always the criminalization, but it's actually the public health responses that are working, and the evidence backs that up. For example, we too are in the community distributing naloxone, and it has saved thousands of lives. We too are in the community distributing fentanyl test strips, and it is saving lives. It is not our responsibility to condemn or condone, but we really don't want people not rendering aid because of a simple policy or law or fear of incarceration. We want to get people the help that they need right away. So I do encourage you to listen to the folks with lived experiences, listen to the folks who are the advocates with the boots on the ground, and the science, which shows public health responses, harm reduction is what's supporting and what's truly making a difference in the crisis for opioid and overdoses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anya.
It's Anya Barnett.
My
Thank you.
apologies. Thank you, Anya. Stuart Little, on behalf of the Behavioral Health Association of Kansas. Welcome to the committee, Stuart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm one of those that you really don't need to hear from with some of the experiences in here. I just want to note for the record, on behalf of the Behavioral Health Association of Kansas, which is 13 drug and alcohol treatment providers across the state, this is a very important part of getting people into treatment and recovery, and we're very supportive of this. Stand for questions.
Thank you, Stuart. Next, we'll be pleased to hear from Amber, private citizen. I'll probably butcher your name, Amber Sayal? Sali? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for taking the time to hear me. It's a very emotional day for me. Today is 5 months that my daughter passed away. We've lost 4 to overdose, fentanyl, in the last 2 years. And 2 of those deaths could have been saved. 2 of those lives could have been saved had this law been in place. The truth of the matter is there's always going to be addiction, always. People are going to try things. A lot of those people are going to witness an overdose. A lot of those people are afraid to call 911 because they have personal use on them or paraphernalia. But there's been so many studies done with this after the law has been passed, and Washington has also, sorry, I'm very nervous. Washington did a survey after the law was passed, and 88% of opiate users indicated that now they're aware that the law has been passed. They're not afraid to call 911. That saves lives. One of the deaths that has occurred in our family was my sister-in-law. She's 36 years old. She left behind 3 kids. She made some mistakes, but everybody does. She was in a house full of people, and they all cleaned the area, and they left her there. One person was afraid to stay but knew that it was wrong to not call 911. And so they did. And then they left instead of staying because they were afraid to go to jail. Another person that we lost was my 16-year-old son-in-law. I don't know exactly how that situation happened, but I know there were people there. And I know had they not been so young, so afraid of stories of people saying you're going to go to jail if you call the police in this situation because now you're an accessory or whatever, his life could have been saved. My 2-year-old grandson would still have his father. We lost our daughter in August, and that was our last straw. And ever since then, my husband and I have went full force against fentanyl. We're in the community passing out Narcan and fentanyl test strips. We've secured the first Save Life station here in Kansas. It's kind of like the little sister to the vending machines. There's no barriers there, you know, it's just out in the public and people can grab the life-saving tools that they need without anyone questioning them. We're trying to break way into schools to educate our youth because from 14 to 45 is who's being attacked by this drug. I really, really think that this is going to save some lives, and I'm sorry, I know I had so much more to say, but I just can't get. Today's a very hard day. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. We thank you for your willingness to come and to share your story. We know it's not easy.
I think that once this law has passed, it's going to prevent so many deaths. It really will. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Amber. Andy Burus is up next.
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. I come to you humbly. My name is Andy Burus. This is my beautiful wife, Rhonda Burus. On January 18th, which was 1 week ago today, my wife, Rhonda, and I lost our beautiful son, Nicholas Cruz Burus, due to fentanyl poisoning. Our testimony begins with Cruz. He was a vibrant 15-year-old boy. Like many children his age, me included, he was curious about many things in life. And with the evolution of the social media platforms, including Snapchat, he decided to answer an advertisement from a local drug dealer. I define them as predators. As a prominent leader of his friend circle, we coined the pack. Cruz thought he would venture where none of his friends have gone before. Tuesday evening, January 17th, 2023, he planned with a drug dealer to deliver a pill to Cruz, perhaps in exchange for $10. Sometime in the hours of 11 p.m.-ish, Cruz met him in the front of our house to make the deal and purchase what Cruz thought was a Percocet pill. As Ron and I slept, Cruz sat on his bed and FaceTimed a couple of his closest friends to share the experience of getting high. As Cruz ingested the pill, his friends witnessed the tragic events that came shortly after. Cruz's friends witnessed, 1, Cruz ingesting the drug, 2, him stop breathing, and 3, falling to his side until his death. The descriptions of this scenario Ron and I vision as even after a year later, his friends have not detailed the actual events and they are still in deep pain and sorrow for the loss of their friends. Shortly after midnight on January 18th, 2023, Cruz's friends texted our then 15-year-old daughter, JC, and asked her to check on Cruz because he was tweaking. being hard asleep, as Rhonda and I, she didn't hear the text. Again, a 15-year-old children, they were scared to death to call Rhonda and I. They were afraid to dial 911 for fear of either getting crews in trouble or themselves in trouble. I believe that the Good Samaritan was an act of law, inclusive of drug-related situations. The boys might have felt confidence to make quick actions with understanding that there'd be no repercussions to them for being good citizens and a good friend. Lastly, helping our friend, neighbor, or stranger is the American way. I pray this bill gets passed, and I further devote my mission to get drug educations with the emphasis of our fentanyl pandemic, as well as educating our children to speak up if you see someone needing immediate medical attention for drug-related incidences or any other incidents. Committee, thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you both very much. Sapphire Garcia Lies? Lise, thank you.
Thank you, honorable members of this committee. I'm here with my father-in-law today to tell you the story of my brother-in-law, Matthew Allen Lease, who should be alive today. He was 33 when he died, and it was fentanyl poisoning, like so many other stories that we've heard of. He should be with us today, but the people that he was using with, his friends, left him to die alone in a cold, vacant lot in Wichita in December. It was a cold night 2 years ago. And he died with no dignity, and his body was found far after medical aid could have been rendered to be helpful. And his death has devastated our family. I can't tell you what it's like to know that my 33-year-old brother-in-law, who I saw sitting in a cardboard box when it was time to claim his body, that we would never know what his journey would have been if he had reached sobriety, because he didn't have that chance, because he was left to die alone in the cold. Nobody deserves to die like that. People who struggle with the disease of addiction are struggling with a medical issue. This is not an ethical issue. This is not a moral issue. This is an issue that affects all of us in Kansas. It crosses all class lines, color lines. It affects Democrats and Republicans alike. Matthew Allen Lease could have been any of your sons. And he's not here today to tell his own story. And so I proudly say his name and honor his memory and hope that you will support this bill, because too many people are dying and they don't need to. Too many of our citizens in Kansas are dying of preventable causes, namely fentanyl addiction. And we need to do something about this. The time to act is now. We're running out of time. I don't have the figure in my front pocket, but I know that folks who have died of fentanyl, that number of deaths has far surpassed all other causes of death in all states. And this is a war right on our front doorstep. We have the power to act. You, all of you who are members of this committee, have the power to support this bill, and I hope that you will. I hope that you will not experience the same tragedy that my family has experienced. I hope that you never have to walk around with the pain of knowing that your loved one's death could have been prevented if the people that they were with had not been afraid to call 911. I hope that you will remember Matthew Allen Lease's name. I hope that you will remember that many of our citizens in Kansas do not have to die, but they're dying today, and you have the power to make the change. Thank you for hearing me today.
Thank you both very much. Mindy Cox.
Thank you. In a year and a half's time, I've lost 4 loved ones to illicit fentanyl, 2 nephews. One was 19. He was joining the Air Force on the Tuesday, and on late Thursday night, Friday morning, his dad left for work, and an hour later, his other son called and said, "You have to get home. My brother's not breathing." He was 19. Literally going to the Air Force. A month later, my 16-year-old nephew, David, whom you've already heard about, passed away. I do know a little bit more, and I do know that if somebody had called 911, the outcome could be different. He could still be here with us. He had just become a father, and he was a kid that came from a really troubled background. He didn't have a dad, and he wanted to be the best dad that he could be. He went with his friends that weekend, and he made a bad choice. And now he never gets to make another choice. My best friend, Monica, who you also heard about, was 36. Unfortunately, she suffered from drug addiction her whole life, and to say she had it rough is an understatement. But she still deserved a chance. A house full of people left her to die because they were scared to pick up the phone and call. And a drug addict or not, I can't imagine that. And then, almost a year later, my niece Kaylee, and I guess I should say too, my nephew Ethan was 19. He had everything going for him. He graduated. He was going to the Air Force. It doesn't discriminate. He wasn't a drug addict. He didn't do drugs. He got a pill from one person, and one pill, then he's gone forever. People are never not going to use drugs. It's a proven fact, never. But if we have this bill in place, maybe people can still help save those people that are drug addicts, or even people that experimented and didn't know what they were getting. We also have a petition that we did for the Good Samaritan Law. We're now at 766 signatures for people that stand behind the bill for the law. I do agree, I can't remember his name, but the changes for the manufacturers, they definitely should not get any leniency. Those are the people that took our loved ones, essentially. I mean, obviously, they all made the choice, but had they not had it so readily accessible or thought that they were getting something else, then it could have been different too. I know I had a lot more to say too, but thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. And I'll be pleased to hear from Mitsy Groves. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Mitsy Groves. I live in Stillwell, Kansas. I have been and am currently a family practice doctor in Overland Park for the last 18 years. But more importantly, I am a mom of 3 boys, ages 20, 13, and 10. I am here today to share our family's ongoing trauma and encourage you to vote in favor of House Bill 2487. My oldest son, Grayson, attended a rigorous academic high school, graduating with a 3.5. He was a starter on his school's varsity basketball team, and they competed in the state Final Four. He worked full-time in the summer after turning 16. He went to college last year and held a 3.7 GPA. He was always well-liked, and he never got into trouble. You can imagine our surprise when in April of 2023, after suffering a seizure that we could not find a cause for, his roommate called to tell us that Grayson had a drug problem. We immediately went and picked him up from college. We put him in a 30-day drug detox and rehab center. After the 30 days, he started an intensive outpatient program, and we thought that he was doing well. On the evening of July 3rd, 2023, my husband, on his way to bed, heard odd noises coming from Grayson's room. He woke me up, and we found Grayson unresponsive. He was dying before our eyes. We called 911. I administered Narcan and sternal rubs. The ambulance and police arrived. Grayson gained consciousness within a few minutes of their arrival. Our family was one of the lucky ones. Thank you to the DCCA and your funding of this program to provide Narcan. We are one of the families that you saved. That night, as Grayson was being taken to the hospital in the ambulance, the police told us they would be issuing a warrant for Grayson's arrest due to drug possession. They said it typically takes about 6 months, but they wanted us to be aware. We were too traumatized at that moment by the near-death experience to ask any questions. We admitted Grayson to an inpatient drug rehab program for the rest of the summer. The medical bills were mounting up, but when your child is ill, you make sacrifices. During these months and continuing, we the parents are doing everything within our power to learn more about drug addiction so that we can best support our son. We are attending parent meetings for substance abuse. We are reading books on addiction. We are talking to drug addiction counselors. I have a medical degree, but very little education related to drug addiction. Nothing encourages knowledge like personal experience. I learned addiction is a disease. It doesn't discriminate. For all of mankind and throughout history, humans have taken diseases we don't understand and assumed they are results of moral failing. In my 18 years practicing medicine, I have seen depression go from the stigma of just get over it and pull yourself up to recognizing it is a brain imbalance that improves with medical intervention. I hope that in my lifetime, I will also see the stigma and misunderstanding of addiction change as well. A few weeks ago, 3 police cars and 6 police officers arrived at our front door. They handcuffed my son and took him to jail. They booked him, charged him with a Class 5 felony for drug possession, and set bond at $2,500. We posted bond for him, but then found out that we were listed as no contact until the court case was settled. We are part of his support system in recovery. We are his home. Both are important elements of recovery. He missed work that day, unable to call and let them know that he would not be in. He is enrolled in online college courses this semester. Now, because we called 911 for life-saving help, he may become a felon. While Grayson and our family understand that actions have consequences, the ramifications of being arrested are widespread and long-lasting and do nothing to encourage his sobriety. During these months, Grayson has made the decision to attend daily recovery groups. He has worked 12-step program, and he has continued to contribute to society in positive ways, all part of successful sobriety. We have hired a lawyer, another great expense. We will find a way to pay the bills, but we are a privileged minority. The majority of Kansas residents would be buried in a lifetime of medical and legal debt, one more stressor on top of the many stressors that addiction brings. What we are learning is that in the fight with addiction, there is an ongoing battle. It is a rare person indeed that doesn't have ups and downs in controlling and battling their diabetes, blood pressure, depression, or weight loss. Heaven forbid my son should ever use again, but if he does and gets another bad batch or drug laced with fentanyl, do we call 911 again, knowing that it would be a second felony carrying significant jail time? This decision is an absolutely horrific position to put people in when they are having a medical emergency. The consequences of all our actions will have to be faced. However, I am asking that the medical help needed to save a life doesn't have to be weighed against legal consequences in those few critical seconds. Kansas is behind. We are one of the 2 states that continues to prosecute drug overdoses. This adds tragedy on top of tragedy. It is my faith that has carried me through these days. I don't believe I am here today testifying before you by accident. I hope that by sharing my family's story, I can share knowledge and a deeper understanding of addiction, for it is by a deeper understanding that we can offer a deeper compassion. I ask you as a physician and more importantly a mother, please pass House Bill 2487 to take away the legal burden of overdoses and allow for medical involvement in both life-saving treatment and hopefully recovery from addiction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Groves. We'll now be pleased to hear from Jenny Ebert.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Today is a hard day for me as well. Jason would be turning 24 today, him and his identical twin brother. When we lost Jason, September 5th of 2021, he didn't know what fentanyl was. I didn't know what fentanyl was. The DEA put out their public advisory, I think it was, on September 27th, the One Pill Can Kill campaign. Losing Jason has been the most heartbreaking, tragic experience that I've ever had to go through. I now speak in the community and educate as many youth, community members, schools that I possibly can. Every time that I'm in the schools and we talk about the signs and what to look for if your friend is in distress from an opioid poisoning, the kids always ask, what do we do? And my number one response is always, call 911. You have got to call 911 without any hesitation. We don't always talk about the fact that the Good Samaritan law is not in place in Kansas, but often teachers and other counselors maybe make reference to that. So it's hard to speak to the kids on one account and tell them to call, do the right thing, knowing that that's not in place to protect them. Our law enforcement in our town has said many, many times that they're there to save a life. They just want the kids to call, make that call. They want EMS to be able to get there and render aid to the person that needs it the most. With that being said, I strongly encourage everyone to take note of this bill and put those measures into place to save lives, knowing that law enforcement is saying that, but then just going the next measure to back them up. Jason was fortunate to have a friend right there that did call. Had he called sooner, my child might still be here today. That Jason did get EMS to his house. They were able to call us to tell us to come. By the time that we had gotten there, 3 miles away, he was already gone. So there shouldn't be a penalty ever for calling and trying to do the right thing to help someone that's in need. I thank you so much for allowing us to come speak today. I too had a lot more to say, but with time as a factor, I just want you to know how much I appreciate the time and attention. And I hope that this passes so we can continue to educate, raise awareness, and encourage anyone that is in that situation to make that phone call to render aid to the person that needs it most. Thank you.
Thank you. Now be pleased to hear from Shannon Earnshaw. Is Shannon with us today? Okay. Her written testimony we have received, you can review that. Our final conferee is Kelly Garner. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me and for letting me talk. My name is Kelly Garner. I'm the mother of Desiree Washington. She was 19 years old. She suddenly passed away on March 8th of 2023 as a result of ingesting a pill in which she thought was Xanax, but in reality contained nothing but fentanyl. I came home from work that day to find my daughter. I am in favor of passing this law, House Bill number 2487, because I have experienced firsthand the inability of the police department in Leavenworth County and Lansing to adequately investigate our children's cases because the users of this evil drug are afraid to talk to the investigators in fear of repercussions against them. I have personally felt the excruciating heartache and pain and despair of losing a child. And I believe that if this law is meant to save lives, then it should seriously be considered. Thank you so much for the talk.
Thank you. There are a number of written proponents that have submitted testimony, so I would encourage our members to look at that. Thank you each very much for sharing your story, for being willing to be here. I can't imagine the loss, but I'm grateful because it's only through your testimony that we're able to be educated, and I know that's hard, so thank you. We now have neutral testimony from Emily Haig, President and CEO of First Call Alcohol and Drug Prevention. Emily.
Thank you for the time. I'm Emily Haig. I'm President and CEO of First Call Alcohol, Drug Prevention and Recovery. We're located in the Kansas City area. We provide substance use education, prevention, recovery support services on both sides of the state line, including Johnson and Wyandotte counties. Over the last 2 years, First Call's responded to an immense demand for overdose prevention programming. We are the largest agency provider of free naloxone drug testing strips and street outreach in the Kansas City metro area. According to the CDC, there were 12,227 suspected overdoses in Kansas in 2023. Over the past 5 years, fatal overdoses have increased by 153%. And in 2021, this increase in overdose deaths is the second highest in the nation. Overdose death is 100% preventable through proper response, including the administration of naloxone, notifying emergency medical services, and providing linkages to recovery support services. However, the lack of protection for bystanders in Kansas by way of a proper Good Samaritan law prevents people from calling 911. People who administer naloxone and people who benefit from harm reduction services are 5 times more likely to enter treatment and 3 times more likely to seek and sustain their recovery from substance use disorder in the future. So overdose prevention doesn't simply save lives. It's offering a person who uses drugs compassion and support, and we can see lasting impact from that. ASAM, which is the American Society of Addiction Medicine, notes that rates of witnesses of overdoses making calls are very low, in between 10 and 30%. 48 states have addressed this reality and prioritized saving lives from a preventable death by strengthening their Good Samaritan law. As experts in this field, we hope that public policy follows best practice to save lives. Strengthening this law to protect bystanders responding to an overdose emergency is the right next step in the state's battle against the overdose crisis. We want Kansans to feel empowered to provide life-saving assistance to friends, families, neighbors, and coworkers. We want agencies to feel empowered to build a more robust prevention program, overdose prevention program, without fear of reprisal or liability for their staff and the people we serve. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you very much. Committee, before we move on, do we have questions for our proponents or our neutral conferees? Representative Mon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you all for your testimony. Some of your testimony literally moved me to tears. I mean, literally, and I can't imagine what you've gone through. But I do have some questions about this bill that might be directed, first of all, to law enforcement and the experts, but I would welcome responses from any of the conferees. The first question I have is on 1B in the bill where it says cooperated with law enforcement officers and emergency medical services. I'm wondering how we're defining that. Does that cooperated? My concern here is that you might have an overzealous prosecutor who says you didn't cooperate because you didn't name all the names of the other people who were in the room. And I'm not saying that would happen often, but I think from time to time it might happen. And so I think we might want to try to define that term a little bit better so that we don't have somebody using the idea that they failed to cooperate by not, going to use a euphemism here, snitching on everyone else. And I don't know, we might just want to tighten up that language. Ed, do you have?
Yes, if I could, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the intent of that, well, let's start with square one. That came from the alcohol law. It's the same in the alcohol law. Our intent in that is that they cooperate in providing information necessary to properly treat the person for their medical emergency. And if you look at the 5 last words in that subsection, it does say cooperate with law enforcement officers and emergency medical service personnel in providing such medical assistance. So that is the intent of that. If there's a desire to clarify that further, I mean, we would welcome that because that is the intent.
Yeah, and I get the intent. I worry about the language a little bit, but it's secondly, while I don't think this bill will do any harm, I am curious as to whether it will actually do any good as far as, you know, if I'm doing drugs with a bunch of other people who are doing drugs and I overdose, is their concern really that they're going to get arrested, or is it that they're also high and don't call because they're impaired? And so it's just, these are just thoughts I have. I support the bill. I don't have, I don't think it's going to do any harm. I just wonder whether there's any empirical evidence that it will actually do any good.
And I would agree with that. I think that's the important thing. We don't think this bill does harm. And I'll tell you, most of the scenes, the vast majority, when we get there, when there's groups where this occurs, there's no group there when we get there. And if this bill causes one incident to leave with somebody sticking around, call a 911, give an aid to that person, put Narcan in them if they have it available, then it's been worth it. So that's our position on it.
And I agree with that. I was just wondering if, if this was,
Representative Probst would like to chime in on this as well, so.
If I may, one more comment.
Of course.
I think it's important that we understand, everybody understands, this fentanyl problem is so huge. There is no one thing by itself is going to make a significant impact. We can't arrest our way out of it. We can't give medical assistance to get our way out of it. It is a lot of things that have to take place if we're going to get our handle on this. If this helps any at all, just a handful of people or one, we're good with that.
Yep, certainly. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do see some friends of mine that work in health departments that have worked with this very closely, so they can probably speak to this better than I can. But some initial research I did, NIH did some county-level analysis and found 7% reduction in overdose deaths in places that had both naloxone and Good Samaritan laws. And when it comes to heroin and synthetic, like fentanyl, there was an 11% reduction. And some states have shown as much as 14 to 15% reduction in overdose deaths. So central point is we do no harm, and that we always strive for that. But I think it's demonstrable that it does some good too. Not completely eliminate overdose deaths, but it is definitely a sizable change. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Carmichael. Oh, sorry.
Anya Barnett with Safe Streets. When we talk about harm reduction, we're meeting people where they are. We don't have all the answers, but we're providing resources so that people don't have to unnecessarily die. And so when we look at a situation and people who use drugs may use drugs with other people, they may not. But it may be someone there who could just be scared because historically, what is it like when you encounter the police? It's very difficult. So to remove that barrier, to give someone the care that they need, that is what this law would essentially do. When I say let's offer health responses, that's taking those barriers away so that we're not criminalizing people, but really connecting people with the care, the resources, the first responders. We're buying time. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. You've heard the testimony here. It could have mattered. It could have counted. That is the story. That is the data. And I really want us to lean into that, the experience, the expertise of folks who are on the front lines of this crisis. Thank you.
All right. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First question for Mr. Culp. Ed? Oh, Clump. I called you like my old friend Steve Culp. It's a heart.
I was having deja vu.
Yeah, I understand. The bill limits the immunities to 4 people on the scene.
As it's written, yes.
Practical question. Officers arrive on the scene. There's 6 of us helping our friend, or maybe 6 of us helping 2 of our friends. How is the officer going to decide who goes to jail and who goes home?
Our hopes would be they wouldn't make that decision. They would just grant it to all 6 and go on their way, but the final decision is going to be with the prosecutor.
So from law enforcement's perspective, we could raise this number to 6 and that'd be fine?
As I stated when I testified, we have no hard position on this number 4. I'm not sure where it came from.
I'm not either, but 40 is too many?
40 is too many. I think
Okay.
40 is too many, but I think 40 is too many for giving aid, and the way it's written right now, that number applies to both giving aid and calling assistance.
Absolutely.
I don't care if 100 call 911.
Thank you.
I would rather they call 911 than think somebody else has.
I look forward to working with you on that. Mr. Chair, I have another important question of Dr. Groves. My colleague and I both share the same emotion, but I'm also very angry, Dr. Groves. You live in Johnson County, Kansas? And your son is charged in district court with a felony? Steve Howe's still the district attorney over there. I've known him for a long time, and I'm angry, and I hope the TV camera is on. This is unacceptable. As I understand it, you did everything you could for your son. You got him into treatment. You're his support mechanism, you and her husband, and the district attorney requested and obtained a no-contact order?
It's my understanding that that's part of bail, that goes on every.
And so District Attorney Howe and his office interfered with your son's rehabilitation by saying that his parents can have no contact with him during his recovery pending disposition of charges?
Yes.
That is unacceptable, Mr. Chairman. I'll be in touch with Steve soon.
Duly noted. Thank you. Further questions for the proponents or neutral committee? Okay. We have opponent testimony by Nick Reinecker. Nick, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Nick Reinecker from Inman, Kansas, and I'm an opponent to this bill today, not without empathy for the people and families who have lost loved ones, but just because this bill doesn't really make any sense as it is written. I believe it tries to put a mask on our society's current mandate on criminalizing certain drug users. And the way that it's written, I feel it gives way too much wiggle room for law enforcement who says, if you talk to a police officer, they say they don't make the law, they just enforce it. But a lot of times that's not necessarily true. And so some of my issues with this bill, and a few have been touched on, it would allow other use of lower level misdemeanors to be used for arrests such as disorderly conduct, trespassing, loitering. We talked about, which I think would be an effectual gotcha from police, even if it's not intended to be. Then in A2A, we've already talked about the not more than 4-person language. And then in subsection B2, with the quantity of illegal drugs, I think it's, are we expecting the public to look around at a party and make sure, oh, there's 5 people here, so, and Bill's got a felony level of drugs on him, so we can't call 911, versus why aren't these friends and people throwing themselves at the mercy of the court and doing everything they can to save their friends. In subsection D, I find it vague and confusing as far as what determines an independent source. Does this nullify the immunity in cases of sharing relevant information or cooperation? And then in subsection E, what would be an example of reckless conduct? And with section E and down, there's like this circle of misunderstanding. It says shall not take into custody, but then it says, well, if you do take him into custody, you could be immune from it with, without the misconduct part. So there's just kind of this, all these pieces that aren't fitting together the way that I think the optics of the proponents and the public will think, oh, well, there's immunity now, so we have immunity. Well, that's not exactly the case. We talked about, there's other issues with, let's say, frequent flyers, people that call and call and call over and over again. We talked about the parolees and probationers issue. And I am for a Controlled Substances Act when it comes to synthetic substances, and believe a hard-on-crime approach is more conducive to our constitutional republic. However, the most straightforward way to ensure that fear of criminalization does not deter help seeking is true decriminalization. I had just a few quick thoughts on the proponent's testimony. Johnson County Mental Health said we should be empowering Kansans to save lives without a second thought. I think this bill is going to provide second thoughts when it gets out there and people start looking at it and see what happens. They're still going to be afraid. The GAO report that's in your committee testimony has a paragraph there that says, while the results of our literature review provide potential insights into the effectiveness of these laws in reducing overdose deaths, specifically because each study selected different combinations of factors, and there are a few studies conducted on each individual factor. We are limited in what we can report about the extent to which these factors contribute to the effectiveness of the laws. The Behavioral Health Association of Kansas says they support the passage of this bill that will keep people alive until emergency help arrives. I don't really understand that one because, you know, there's different, does that guarantee that people are doing CPR and stuff like that? Couple little things. A representative from Leavenworth said, if we can save just one of these overdose victims, all the work to pass this legislation will have been worth it. I agree if, number one, it is historically constitutional, and number two, if it makes sense. Representative from Wichita talked about God. I won't, you know, begin to try to go into that where we intersect faith, family, and freedom and legislative priorities. And then Ms. Ebert said, law enforcement in my community have been clear. They do not want to make an arrest. They want to save a life. So, like I said, I'm not an opponent of this bill for lack of empathy for the people who have lost loved ones, but I just think that as it's written, it doesn't really make any sense, and it's more of a law enforcement bill than anything. Thank you, and I will stand for questions.
Thank you. Boog, my apologies for not getting to you earlier. Boog Heiberger, Representative Heiberger is online with us. Feel free to go forward with your questions for any of the proponents, neutral or opponents.
No problem, Mr. Chair. Representative Carmichael essentially asked my question, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Committee, further questions? All right, seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2487. Again, thank you all for being here and all willing to testify. If any of you need to leave, feel free to do so. We are going to be moving into our hearing on House Bill 2490, and we'll ask Natalie to give us a review on House Bill 2490. If there are some conversations that need to continue, feel free to step out in the hallway.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2490 provides that each juvenile offender case length limit extension shall be for not longer than 90 days. Yeah, go for it, thanks. The bill amends KSA 382391, the statute in the Juvenile Offender Code that provides for the overall case length limit and probation length limit in juvenile offender cases. Last year in House Bill 2021, this law was amended to allow extensions of the overall case length limit in juvenile offender cases when the juvenile has failed to complete a court-ordered program, and that failure is due to repeated intentional effort to delay by the juvenile as reported by the evidence-based services provider. You'll recall before that they were able to extend probation length limits but not overall case length limits. So this allowed an extension of an overall case length limit in certain circumstances. That bill also required that those overall case length limit extensions could only be granted incrementally. This bill would provide that the incremental extensions of the overall case length limit cannot exceed 90 days per extension. And I can take any questions.
Any questions for Natalie, committee? Go right ahead, Representative Carmichael.
And I'm sorry, I was honestly not well prepared for this bill. Is it 90 days per case or 90 days per extension?
Mr. Chairman, that would be, so I believe, and I mean, a practitioner would probably be able to answer this better than me, but I believe that right now each case can have its own extension of an overall case length limit. So the overall case length limits are calculated based on the type of offense. So if a juvenile offender comes in with one offense that puts them in a 12-month overall case length limit, and another case that comes in with an 18-month overall case length limit, you know, those two cases are going to have different overall case length limits. So if an extension is needed because they need to complete a program, if it's only needed in that 12-month case, then, it's just going to be granted for that particular case. If it's needed in both, then the extension would have to be granted in both cases, and they would only be able to be granted, 90 days at a time for each extension.
But they could continue to stack cumulatively, so we could be talking about 180 days if there's 2 offenses. I don't do the math well. We could end up extending somebody for years.
Well, but it would only be 90 days per case at the time. So
Sorry, but it's consecutive. It could be consecutive. I may have said cumulative. It could be consecutive. You could keep somebody for a long time, couldn't you, if you have enough offenses?
Well, they would have to come in, every 90 days for a new extension, essentially, because you wouldn't be able to say, there's 2 cases here, so your overall, I'm granting an extension of 180 days. You'd only be able to
You do it 90 days at a time based on the number of offenses. And so if you got enough offenses, you can keep them forever.
So before we continue with that, let's go ahead and have Jillian Block. So she's going to explain why this was part of our oversight committee and where this came from. Because all we're doing is attaching a specific length limit of 90 days. We already have passed the law that allows for the extension. We just didn't specify how long that extension would be. So this says that the 90 days, we're actually placing a specific period by which they have to come in and request additional extension.
I will await the testimony, Mr. Chair, as you suggest.
Thank you. Natalie, thank you. Jillian, why don't you share with us a little bit more about the Oversight Committee's work on this topic specifically?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Excuse me. As stated, I'm Jillian Block with Legislative Research and the facilitator of the J. Russ Jennings Joint Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice Oversight. If you want to review the full report, that was sent out in the emails today with the full title of it in the file name. So the committee met for 3 days this October to fulfill its statutory duties of overseeing the juvenile justice goings-on, the implementation of the 2016 House Bill 367, as well as some other charges, including the implementation of 2023 House Bill 2021, which we passed last session. In that part of the testimony on the first day, we heard from many conferees, including the chairman of the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, and the deputy director of Kansas Appleseed. And of the conferees, the general consensus was more time was necessary to collect more data on this. However, a concern that was brought up by both the chairperson of the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee and Kansas Appleseed is that the pass to extend these case length limits incrementally is not defined. And so the law that passed and was signed is right now limitless and just can be extended and extended and extended, which is a concern for both the Oversight Committee and Kansas Appleseed. And the bill that you're looking at is one of the recommended pieces of legislation as a result of those concerns. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any other questions the committee may have.
Very good. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you. If you can, how was it that the committee agreed, if they did, upon 90 days as opposed to 45 days, as opposed to 180 days, or as opposed to the rest of someone's life?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, I don't recall that coming up in committee discussion off the top of my head. I'd be happy to go back and review it.
I think we have someone who participated here. I just was hoping I could get your neutral and unbiased perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Further questions for Jillian? Representative Mon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my understanding of this is it takes the discretion for extensions out of the judge's hands and limits it by statute. Is that kind of what we're doing here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, As I understand it, and I will happily allow myself to be corrected by the revisor if I'm wrong, the judge still has the discretion to grant it whether or not. What this is doing is limiting for how long it can continue to be extended.
So, but we're still taking the discretion of the length of the extension out of the judge's hands and just limiting it by statute. Is that kind of my understanding?
I think it's fair to say that currently, under the legislation that passed, we said that the case length limit could be extended incrementally. The problem is we didn't define what incrementally was. And so as part of our work, and I chaired this committee, and this was actually my recommendation, we decided upon 90 days as that incremental period so that it can only be extended for up to 90 days, and then they would have to come back to court to extend it another 90 days. And remember, these extensions can only occur if very specific requirements are met and programming itself has not been extended. So all we're trying to do with this bill is define what incrementally meant, just so you know. Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess to add to the confusion, when I read the new language, to me, it seems to read that it's an unlimited number of extensions, each of which will not exceed 90 days. I have that correctly? So we're not.
That is correct.
I guess I'm just confused then. What are we, we're talking as if it's an overall limit, but it's really just an unlimited amount of 90-day extensions.
So the legislation last year, and maybe we need to review that because we've reviewed it a little bit, but the legislation, currently before the legislation we passed last year in 2021, probation length limits could be extended if programming is not finished. But we did not allow the extension of the case as a whole if programming was not finished. This, under that law, said that if programming isn't completed, evidence-based treatment, things like that, the judge can extend the case length limit incrementally. Well, without any definition on what incrementally is, we said, based on the recommendations of the JJOC, based on other recommendations, that we would put some time frame on that, which we decided as a committee would be 90 days to ensure that there is a continued review period and that a judge just can't say we're going to continue this case until the child is 21, right? So we're actually putting a specific review process in there in the event that that programming is not completed and requiring it to come back in front of a judge to continue the case longer if need be. Any other questions, committee? All right, seeing none. We have proponent testimony that is written only from Kevin Waring, Legislative Chair of Kansas Association of Court Services. We do have neutral testimony from Mike Funkert of Kansas Appleseed. Mike is here if you'd like to share with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am Mike Funkert, Deputy Director of Kansas Appleseed, and our organization's name has been brought up, so this is perfect. You can see my testimony, you can see the data that we cite, et cetera, but I just wanted to kind of cut through the issue here. There were some questions. As the chairman aptly described, last year a bill which we opposed was passed and allowed for incremental extensions. We certainly support the spirit of this bill today at defining that length, but we would ask what rational, logical, or data-based reason was 90 selected. You're already identifying this is a child that has failed to complete a program, has had some trouble maybe following the rules that have been assigned to them. And so my recommendation would be that we cap that extension time, even though extensions aren't necessarily best practice, which KDOC can also verify, at 30 days instead of 90. This would ensure that the court, when you encounter a young person that's not being successful at completion, is coming back monthly to see what the progress is and to really check in on that young person. 90 days is a long time, particularly in the life of a young person. If you look at the case length limits that are in effect, it's some 25% of certain case length limits that exist. And so I think when we recognize that we have a kid that's struggling to complete on time, is certainly having some issues, I think a more timely check-in that limits that time period is wise. And I think to Representative Titus's question earlier, there still is nothing in this bill that would cap the number of extensions. And I think when we recognize that the data shows us that more time does not always equal better outcomes, it's really how you intervene in that kid's life, which I know you've heard about in the past, and finding the positive behavior support that actually works for that young person, rather than just saying, well, 3 more months, 3 more months, 3 more months. You do still, with this bill, have potentially kind of quasi-indefinite detention. So I would certainly encourage the committee to think about how many extensions are appropriate. At some point, even if you did choose to reduce it to 30 days, which I highly recommend, you've extended it 9 times, down the road. At what point do you say what we're doing isn't working, and how do we find a better way to interact with that kid and try and change their behavior? So today, I would really encourage that you consider reducing that time frame so that the court is routinely checking in, not every 3 months, but monthly, and hopefully, the act of having to go back to court, have your case extended, be in front of a judge, is prompting that kid to get the work done. And, in a lot of cases, the less time that we keep them involved in the justice system, the better. And so that's what my recommendation would be, certainly also with the encouragement to think about the number of extensions and at what point we cut that off. So with that, I really thank you all for listening to me today, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike, and certainly not opposed to, further discussions around that term. I'm hesitant to say that we should just cut it off, because then we have no case and no oversight, and we're just, in my mind personally, we're just giving up and saying, well, since you're not doing programming, you're not fulfilling your responsibilities, we're just going to give up on the case and give up on the youth, and I don't want to do that. So but I do understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate that. Committee, additional questions for Mike? Thank you very much. We have opponent testimony from Nick Reinecker. Nick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for allowing me to speak today on House Bill 2490. I'm an opponent. I testified as an opponent last year to House Bill 2021 because I feel like it did a semi-gut and go of Senate Bill 367 that put all these things into place with the case limits and the technical violation issues. And so my testimony, I put here a scenario. And if that scenario is something that can happen with this bill or without this bill, I think it needs to be fixed. If it's not, I apologize for wasting the committee's time. But if technical violations are going to be allowed as something, and I want to make a note of this, in the bill here and in the language, it says stuff about offenders adjudicated for a misdemeanor may remain under the jurisdiction of the court for up to 12 months. And on the back, page 2, G1A, says low risk and moderate risk offenders adjudicated for misdemeanor and low risk offenders adjudicated for a felony may be placed on probation for a term up to 6 months. So whether it's 6 months or 12 months, we're talking about 90 days, first of all, being like half of that probation sentence, and then you're letting them indefinitely extend it over and over again. So you have my testimony, and I won't put any more commentary into it. I do, yesterday I listened to the Sentencing Commission, and on slide 45 had like 70% of amphetamines, and then correlate that with the K-Trax amphetamine prescribing. We put our kids on a lot of amphetamines, and then we expect them not to be addicted to it when they get older, but that's another issue. But I am against this bill because I feel it could be used indefinitely for technical violations, and I'll stand for any questions. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Any questions, committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you all for being here. We'll close the hearing on House Bill 2490, and we'll be, well, before we adjourn, just just keep both of these bills on your radar, because chances are we'll be working on them next week. So thank you all very much. We're adjourned. Have